Well, nice to have you all. Obviously, the reason for this is there's a lot going on in the world, and we wanted to have a productive conversation about what's going on. And so, what we're going to do is use the EPIC framework that I've come up with over the past 2 years or so. Um, and that's going to help us get through it because these conversations are necessary. And so, the only thing, there's always, whenever we do these conversations, I do these conversations, there's four rules. One is to be honest. One is to listen, not wait to speak. One is to commit to the conversation. Even if you feel like you want to disappear, you still have to commit. And the last is to commit to the idea of being wrong. When the point of doing these conversations is for people to say, I didn't know that. I never understood that. I never heard that. That's the point. So the more that we vocalize, oh, I didn't know that, I wasn't aware of that, the better it is, because that's what we're doing these conversations for, is to experience other people's lives, to learn things that we would never have access to. Um, the first step of the process is equalization. And the reason why this is so important is because you have to have some connection to each other to be vulnerable. And it's highly unlikely you're going to be vulnerable if you start talking about the thing you have least in common. So that's why we don't start talking on the topic. We start talking sort of getting to know each other. And the trick about equalization is finding what we all have in common, which is usually hard, except for we've all been through a pandemic. So it's the great equalizer. We're all in the middle of a pandemic. So the first thing I'm going to ask is sort of what everyone's pandemic situation is like, because we're all going through it. And from there, we'll sort of move on to other stuff. But it is a great equalizer. We're all in the same boat right now, no matter where we are. We're all in the middle of the pandemic. So Lizzie, what's your pandemic been like?
Oh, craziness, sheer craziness.
Yeah.
My workload doubled for one thing, just because we incorporated all of this Zoom stuff.
Yeah.
So doing that. But basically back in January, I work with some international clients. I've been watching BBC, just different international news. So in January, we started having the discussion if we were going to have to be on lockdown or anything like that, where would that happen at? Because my daughters recently moved out of the home. And so my husband and I decided the daughters wanted us with them because they didn't think they could weather this on their own. So we are 40 minutes from home, but we travel back to our home in Shippensburg, which is 40 minutes from Harrisburg. I am literally right across the river from Harrisburg right now.
Okay.
In New Cumberland. And so we go back, we mow grass, we kind of, go back when we get tired of each other, we disappear for 48 hours in Shippensburg. So that's kind of what our situation is. My husband's a nurse, so that's another layer on top of everything. And so he gets decontaminated. Nobody knows the work behind, like, trying to decontaminate somebody coming back in.
I do, because my husband runs a nursing home. So I was saying,
Okay, so you do know.
of daily decontamination. It's driving me insane.
Oh, we start at the front door. If my daughter wasn't so close to neighbors, we would have him strip outside and then bring him in.
Yeah, we do. My husband changes outside and he comes in and like but it's every day now for 3 months. It's hard.
It is. And it's just now at my husband's work is escalating. They are seeing more cases at the nursing home that he's at.
Okay.
And his hallway, one of the guys that had COVID or got diagnosed, he was tested, I think, at dialysis, and somehow he fell between the cracks and the nursing home wasn't notified for about 7 or 8 days.
Yeah.
And he roamed through the nursing home. And so they ended up testing like with his whole one wing when people started to run temps. Yeah. So we think, we'll know by next week whether he has antibodies, but like I said, they were all very sick in January. So we think that's what they were dealing with then.
Got it. Vince, how are you doing?
I'm chilling. My COVID, well, I'm not chilling, but my COVID experience, I've been by myself in Miami. My roommate lives in LA, so I came back out here to Miami March 13th, and I decontaminate myself pretty much. I'm sitting here by myself and literally was just gardening and painting and just trying to figure out how to take over the world with art, and now that's exploded into other things.
And Vanessa, how are you? Where are you, Vanessa?
I'm just outside of Portland, Maine. I have in this tiny little town with no stoplights. But I work at the largest employer in Maine. It's a pet health company as a research scientist. So most of us got sent home. My project was deemed business critical from the beginning. So I've been going to work 1, 2, 3 days a week the whole time to get my lab work done. I can do all my data analysis and stuff at home. So I'm minimizing my time in the lab as much as possible, but I've still been there a lot. My dog's daycare closed, so it's been fun trying to keep him tired. He's about 14 months. He's still all puppy, so trying to keep him entertained and out of trouble. Yeah.
I have a 3 and a 4-year-old running around
right
me
there.
at all times.
Yeah, he's kind of like having a toddler. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah, I kind of treated it as a little bit of a treat and kind of they cut my pay 10%, but I'm still getting paid. So just trying to take advantage of it while I can.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a bit about what's going on. Vanessa and Lizzie, if you don't mind sharing a bit about why you wanted to have this conversation. I'll start with you, Lizzie, and then Vince, I'll go to you. Why were you open to having this conversation, being a part of this conversation? So Lizzie, let's start with you. What is it you're looking to get from this conversation?
I think just to hear everyone else tell about their perspectives into what's happening. When you say being from a town of, small, that I was too, we never even had a stop sign at the intersection. It was that small, like 500 people. I don't ever remember any diversity when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. So I watch what's going on TV, and it's through media. But I do know that I don't just watch one media source if I kind of want to get a full picture, because I try to watch all of them, to catch a little bit. Mm-hmm. But it's alarming to me to see the violence that's taking place. And I'm starting to understand a little bit more of it. I've been doing DNA research on myself, like I did the test. And so I was watching Finding Your Roots. I had mentioned this. And through watching that, I learned about people connecting with the slavery issues, their family members, and watching these people talk about how they found what the price of a relative was. It might have been a great-great-great-grandfather, or in the emotional impact of that. And so it started me thinking, wow, how would I feel about that? Mm-hmm. And so I'm just trying to gain a better perspective. I did watch the Netflix
13th.
The 13th, and I have I made all kinds of notes.
Hey, that's beautiful. I actually rewatched it again last night and made notes again too as well.
Good. And I know, Vanessa, you don't have Netflix. That's fine.
No, I don't.
We'll keep you. And so
I'm actually grabbing my notes.
Lizzie, what is it you want to get out of this conversation?
Want a better understanding, and I want to be able to move forward the conversation with other people.
And Vanessa, what is it you wanted to get out of this conversation?
Yeah, I grew up, both my parents were military officers. In the military, everyone's treated exactly the same, more based on rank than anything else. And then I moved to Maine, which less so now, but is a fairly white predominant state. We have a couple pockets. We get a lot of Somali immigrants here, but they tend to kind of be in their own communities. I've never really had a lot of interaction with them. It's just such a foreign concept to me to have race be a consideration in anything. And it's just not how I was raised. It's not any experience I've had. I've lived a lot of places. I lived in Japan. I've lived in Allentown, Pennsylvania, so close to you, Lizzie. I've lived in Nashville and Austin, but it's just, I've never seen it. Where I work now, I was actually the first Native American born person on the team I work at on work. So my boss is from Kenya and came here as a really young adult. We have people from Sri Lanka and China and India. So and everyone there is treated just like everyone else. It's something I've never witnessed, completely foreign to me. So I'm just hearing someone else's experience that didn't grow up like I did.
And I think that's the point of this. And we'll segue to Vince, is that how could you know about something if you have no exposure to it? And so what I appreciate about the two of you reaching out to me is saying, in your day-to-day lives, you don't have that much exposure or awareness of it. How can you get that insight? And then now we segue to my friend Vince. We worked together many years ago. We've known each other a long time. Vince, what was it you wanted to get offer in this conversation or get out of this conversation? What's the best case scenario for you of this conversation?
I mean, for me personally, it's about sharing my experiences, but also educating people who don't know what's been going on or who have never been, exposed to the craziness of what's really happening right now. Like my mom was born and raised in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
My grandfather, when she was young, the local community swimming pool was completely segregated. Like there was no black people allowed to go to that swimming pool. My grandfather was not having that. He went down there and he made them take my mother and her best friend and let them swim inside that place. And from that day forward, everyone was allowed to swim at the community pool. It wasn't a black white thing. But my grandfather, obviously, the apple doesn't fall far because I'm literally trying to do the same thing at this point. But I mean, I think I'm just really trying to communicate and share my experiences as well as see what other views people have on why they may think that the things that are happening right now should be the way they are or shouldn't be. Everybody is a human, obviously, and what's happening right now is completely, for years, hundreds of years, is completely inhumane. And obviously, the main factor is that now we have phones. Everybody has a phone now, so now it's right in everybody's face, and that's why half the country is on fire right now because it was a powder keg just waiting to happen.
So
And
let's talk about that because the next step of the epic system is the equalization we talk about is personalization. So Vince, if you don't mind, we're going to have you talk a bit about what you've experienced. And while he's personalizing, the other two, we're in information gathering. Think of yourself as a detective. We're asking questions to draw out more information. But let's talk a bit about, because a lot of times people think this is something that happened. Slavery was a while ago. Segregation was a while ago. The swimming pool that you're talking about was a while ago.
right,
You, Vince, in your life, in a way that relates to what's going on now, how have you experienced this dehumanization, inequality, however you want to? Let's just have you talk for a little bit about what you've actually gone through in your life, not something from the past.
no, well, I grew up in Burbank, and Burbank is a predominantly white town. There, it has very, very deep racist roots within it. And to this day, people are still teaching their kids almost in the same manner that they've been taught. I've been going through my friends list of just people who I thought were friends of mine, but then I go through their feed and I see nothing but racist and crazy comments about what are these, people doing when thugs, when they really want to say the word niggers, is really the word that everybody wants to say who's saying these things about the people who are just looting. Now we know there's opportunists, but for me personally, I like growing up in Burbank. I lived in a beautiful condo with my parents. My dad worked for Disney for 30 years. My mom worked for NBC. Um, at the time was in high school. I was coming home from Domino's Pizza. A 16-year-old kid coming home in my '83 Honda Accord, not a fancy car, but a car that I worked for. I paid for myself, and literally parallel parking into the front of my house. I get lit up by the cops, and I'm like, "What's going on?" They run up to the car, ask me, "Boy, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "I live here. I'm parking my car. I just got off work. I'm going home." "No, you don't. You don't live here. Let me see your ID." Okay. I start to reach for my ID. He pulls his gun out on me and puts it against my head. And
This
I'm
is
like,
very
"Officer,"
common, the reaching for the ID, asking
right,
to get the ID, and then pulling a gun as the movement happens. I've heard this story from friends all over America. Reaching for the ID creates the situation that they feel like you moved.
and literally, I'm not thinking this man is going to kill me right now. This is a cop. He's supposed to be protecting me. But within a flash, I could have been dead if I had made any more sudden moves or anything. And he wouldn't have had a single problem with doing that to me. It's scary. It's the probably the scariest thing that I've ever had to go through, and it's not like it's an everyday thing. It doesn't matter every day that I walk out the door. It's PTSD that's lasted for hundreds of years for all and every single black man. I can't feel comfortable getting in a car and a cop get behind me and not wonder if today is the day or if I'm going to get pulled over because I make a illegal lane change and now for the rest of my life, or maybe this is the rest of my life right
Do you, when people talk about this and they say it's a few bad apples, it doesn't happen that often. There's bad police and there's good police. You just happen to experience the bad police. How do you, from your perspective, explain to them that it's bigger than that? That it's not just a few bad apples, that there's something in the system that gives immunity to this behavior. How, from your perspective, what is it that you feel people don't get as the scope of the problem?
Well, that the bigger issue is that yes, there's a few bad apples in there, but the good apples aren't speaking up on what's going on and what they're seeing. And I know the Whistleblower Act is enacted right now or whatever. It's a bill, but at the same time, that just leaves it open for these bad apples and bad government officials and all these other bad politicians to do exactly what they want to any race. I don't care. At this point now, it's going to be any race. Black people, white people, all of us are expendable now at this point, is the way that I actually feel. I just wish that there would be more cops that even anonymously could come forward or find a way to share the information and the things that they've seen and the injustices that they've witnessed and not try to be a part of. Like, I mean, I just really think that's so necessary right now.
Mhm. Lizzie, Vanessa, when he shares that sort of his own experience and people you know, does that surprise you? Is it something that you've heard of? Is it something that you're aware of happens? Do you, before this conversation, did you feel like it doesn't happen that often? What are your thoughts on this kind of thing, this kind of information that Vince is saying he's experienced?
I mean, it puts a lot in perspective. It's kind of shocking because I've been pulled over a lot. I drive fast.
Oh, well, now
But I
that's your
was,
fault.
right, yeah. I've rightfully gotten some tickets. But I got pulled over in Texas. I had a concealed carry permit and I was carrying that day. And so I did what you're supposed to do, like didn't move, told the officer. He asked where it was. I said, it's in my purse. And he said, where's your ID? I said, that's in my purse. And I didn't move. And after several seconds of pausing, he told me, since you told me about it, I'm going to trust you to grab your wallet and not your gun. And he let me reach into my purse. And I was stunned. I fully expected him to walk around the car.
I'm
Yeah,
stunned.
I fully expected him to walk around the car and disarm me, which he's well within his rights to do. But I don't know if that's standard practice for this officer. Like, it's just so hard to know what's a one-off occurrence or what's, common. I couldn't believe it. And he did. He let me get my wallet and give him my ID.
Vince, do you think, and I really, do you think that if you came across a police officer and said, both my ID and my gun are in my bag, do you feel like he would allow you to reach for your ID?
In Miami, you can have a conceal and carry out here, and pretty much everybody's got a gun. In Miami, it's such a melting pot of people, from Trinidadians to Haitians to Cubans to Black people, that I've not had one single issue with an officer in Miami. And I kind of feel like in Miami, in just Miami, not Florida, but in Miami, that's not something that I actually would probably have to deal with. I feel like even though there is a lot of really bad neighborhoods around here and a lot of gang activity and that type of stuff, I feel like me personally, if I was as open and honest as you were, Vanessa, and said, officer, I have a conceal and carry, because I feel like at this point now, I'm always going to have my ID ready to go. I'm not reaching for anything that's going to be in the car door. So I'm going to have that sort of item ready to just hand off. So with that, in that respect, I don't think I would be too worried if I really was, had the, proper permits and whatnot for concealment and carry. But in Los Angeles, no way.
No way.
No way.
And when you're watching what's happening, Vince, how do you feel about being a Black man in America today? And the background is, I know Vince. Like, Vince is, we've worked together many times. There isn't this need to put his Blackness forward with Vince. Like, it's Vince, we know that. But when he goes throughout America, he is seen first through his skin. What is it like for you, Vince, looking at what's happening now? What is it honestly like for you being a Black man today?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I've gone through such an array of emotions in the past 8 to 9 days, from just general fear to just constant crying to at certain points wishing I wasn't alive at this point to even be dealing with this. Like, not that I'm on any kind of suicidal thing or rant or anything like that. I'm just saying, as a black man, this, if pardon my French, this shit is hard.
What do you think is at stake right now in terms of what's happening now? What is it that the Black community, in your opinion, is looking for? What do you think that they want? What is the need now?
I mean, obviously, we want our voice to be heard, and hence why a lot of the violence has ensued. But I also feel like a lot of the violence has to do with a lot of these other righteous, crazy groups that are just planting and doing their thing.
I think that's a
I
very
think,
important distinction. I do think that the protesters are being drowned out by the violence.
for sure.
And I feel like, in the same way that people are like, but you have a few bad cops ruining all cops, and you have a
Right.
few bad protesters ruining all the protesting. And the comments I'm seeing a lot are, I feel bad for what happened, but this isn't acceptable. And I'm like, but they're two separate things. You know,
Right.
one is a reaction by non-productive people, and that is louder, more captivating, more interesting for your news cameras than the quieter stuff that's happening legitimately. And so
Right.
I think what always happens, I find, in situations like this, is that it becomes about the taking the knee and not the issue. It becomes about the reaction to the issue. And we talk about that constantly, the violence, the taking the knee, the violence, taking it, but we never talk about the issue, which is that there's a
Right.
systemic problem here, specifically when it comes to policing Black people, and specifically Black males. And I think that never gets the conversation because we end up talking about the symptoms. Does
Right.
that, Vanessa and Lizzie, how do you feel when I say that?
Well, I agree with that because we were just talking this afternoon. I had to go out and run a couple errands. And I said to my daughter, did you happen to see the young couple? He was what, 22? She was 20. And they got caught up in the
In
rioting.
Atlanta, yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I was mortified as to what I was seeing because there it was in full video showing us.
Once
And
again.
once again, you know, not only did we have to explain the first video to a 6-year-old, my grandson, because this is all running on TV, then this one popped up and we're talking about it. And at 6, he's old enough to ask questions. So we're trying to give some very honest answers on a 6-year-old level, which, you know, it's hard, but he does get it. It's just like trying to explain the
Six-year-olds
virus.
are not 6-year-olds are not dumb. That's for sure.
Right, yeah. And so we want him to understand that this is going on. It doesn't surprise me because the community that I was raised in, there may have been one family who was Black, and I don't know that they lived there all that long. That's really the only memory I have of anybody who was not white skinned. And so I remember in the 70s, my mom was so excited because she participated in I think they called it Fresh Air. I'm not even sure if that program still exists, where city kids would come from New York to the country to experience the country. And she talked to Dad, and Dad said it was okay. So we got a little boy from inner city New York who came to spend, it might have been like 10 days with us. My brothers were livid. They weren't even living at home. There were a lot of years difference. They were already out with their own families. They were livid that we had a Black little boy, his name's Prentice Covington, with us. And the things that would come out of my brothers' mouths were horrid. Absolutely horrid.
Like what? Like what would they say?
Well, they would use the N word. They would call him the N word, and you know, it was horrible, and it was demeaning comments, or he isn't smart enough to know. And he was very excited to be in the country. He was rambunctious, and they would just say horrible things about he isn't smart enough to listen. Look at this, you know. And it was, you know, it just wasn't right, you know. And even as a child, I remember. one of my favorite doll babies was a little black doll baby that I had, and I played with it all the time. And when I grew up and didn't need it anymore, I had a niece who wanted it, and I gave it to her, and my brother burned it. And I was just like, it was horrible.
I appreciate your honesty, Lizzie. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you. Like,
Because we know these things happen. We know
Yeah.
it's not everyone, but
Right.
no one talks about it. No one says it. And we're like, we're not making this up. We're not, Vince is not creating a reality of these people being against him that isn't real. So I really appreciate you saying that, because it is everywhere. It's not every person, but it is everywhere. Vanessa, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Did that scare you at all? The fact that they burned this doll? Like, did that?
Oh, I was so angry. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you don't know me, but I'm very vocal. And I didn't get that way till I was about 40. When the rights movements was going on, my mother was all for Gloria Steinem. And so if Gloria was on TV, she had me parked in front of the TV. So I'm very much an activist in that, but that voice didn't really come alive until I was 40. And but I do use it. So I express, but even as a child, I cried when he did that, and I never got an explanation why he felt the need to do that, because I was just younger. I didn't need to have a say. And that was probably part of why Mom pushed women's rights. She always used to tell me that I determine my value and nobody else, because I had brothers that were always trying to be very push the women down in the family. And, so she did make a stance with that. So I can kind of relate to some things, just because women were struggling too, still do.
Sure. Vanessa, have you in your life seen friends, coworkers, people, have you seen the disparaging comments or the looks or the, to me, it's something like, it's people crossing the street, when the black man comes, or, it's all of those. Do you see that in your world, or is that something that's not as present in your world? It's an honest question.
I can't say I've ever seen it in my world. I mean, I have some, my older relatives, like my elderly grandparents and stuff. I actually, one in particular, they kind of feel the need to point race out when it doesn't matter, like when it has no bearing on the story they're telling or what they're talking about. My grandfather's lady friend she does it the most. It's weird. My grandfather survived stage 4 cancer last year. And she spent a lot of time at the hotel near the hospital in Boston, where he was for 7 weeks. And every time she talks about the waiters at the restaurant there, and they're all black. Mm-hmm. Why do you feel the need to say that? Like, it doesn't add anything to the story. So, I mean, that's probably the most I've seen. I've grown up. I took the DNA test too. I'm like 95% white European. I've grown up very white.
Very white.
Like one of the whitest people you'll meet.
And I think that's what's
and that's not a bad thing though, too. I think
right.
that you should be proud of your whiteness. You know what I mean? Like, and people are making it, all of us not be able to be proud of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm like a 57 Heinz. My DNA took me all over the place. Although 65% European, we even found 3% Ashkenazi Jew. And I'm not quite sure where that came from.
You have some questions to ask. What's going on? What did uncles and aunts do? Like, if these ethnicities are popping up in your DNA, you got to ask some questions. Vince, because I think, and I wanted you to see the 13th, Lizzie and Vanessa, we can talk a bit about it, is that what I like about it is it very clearly lays out the connective dots of, slavery, and then Jim Crow, and then segregation, and then law and order and the police state. And sort of the underlying thing is that 1 in 4 black men has been involved in prison in some way, which seems absurd. And what is so interesting about it is that they really show how this need to have this war on drugs was about keeping up quotas of arrests. And the way they would arrest people was just pick them up, and they would never get a trial. They would be pressured into plea bargaining. And so you have someone, and they talk to many of these people in the documentary, and I'll figure out how to get it to you, Vanessa, who are basically, I was doing nothing, I got picked up, I was told that I could spend 25 years in jail, or I could plea bargain to 5, and they don't understand the system enough. And so constantly the prisons are filled with this population of people that are picked up in the inner cities who have no ability to resist. And the immediate assumption that you're a criminal, is what follows Black men a lot. Even if it's not in our hearts, it's what legally follows them. Vince, being a Black man in America, what do you feel like a second class? Do you feel nervous? Do you feel threatened? What is it, if you can articulate to these women in particular who you're talking with, what is it you feel that needs to be addressed now? Because I've watched you now on Facebook for the past few days, and it's been an intense emotional few days for you. What is it that you'd like to convey that you think often gets lost in people saying, oh, I don't like the protesting, because none of us likes the violence, but you lose the message?
I mean, what people have to understand is that this has been going on for so long. And like all the opportunists aside, the people who are really protesting, enough is enough. Like, to watch a man lose his life on national television and scream for his mother who is dead is the heart. Like, I couldn't watch the video. I just finally watched the whole thing maybe over the weekend. I couldn't bring myself to watch it because it was just yet another one that could have been lost into the shuffle. And thank God this 13-year-old girl, who now is being belittled and tortured and bullied on the internet because she took the video. What we want is equality. We want to be able to be looked at the same as you, Lizzie, the same as you, Vanessa, the same as you, Riaz. The struggle has been so long, and just like the 13th, I mean, the Jim Crow era, and with the whole war on drugs, they flooded the drugs to us. We have no connections to drugs. We have no big money to buy drugs or drug cartels. That's not something we've ever been able to do. The last time Black people had any money was in Oklahoma on the Black Wall Street, and they dropped bombs on us and burned everything that we own.
Let's ask Vanessa and Lizzie, do you know about the Oklahoma riot and the burning of Black Wall Street? Because that's a very pivotal event that is not taught in any schools. Would be. Vince, would you explain what that was? Because it is a concrete example, and you can look it up later, of the kind of history that Vince is like exhausted by, that the other side doesn't know. And so, just if you could explain very briefly what that was, that event in history.
Basically, the town was a completely all-owned, free Black town where there were businessmen and bankers and restaurant owners. But all of the money that was in the town was all of ours. There was no outside money. I mean, obviously, in the time, everything was still quite segregated at the time, but we owned everything. It was literally one of the first things that we owned after all of this whole 13th Amendment and free the slaves thing. And as soon as
1909, 1900, what are we?
1909, I believe.
Something like that. Okay, so we're just turn of the century.
Correct. But then Big Brother and white America started to see that we didn't need them, that we could survive without them, and they decided to drop bombs on the entire town. They looted it, they rioted it, they killed over 300 people within a matter of hours, and literally dropped bombs on the entire town. It's one of the only times on American history that bombs have been dropped, and it was on Black people.
And so who ordered that, or who is they? Can you define that?
I don't remember which president. I got to look what president that was for the time. But and I apologize for not knowing that.
No, that's fine. I'll Google.
But it's an event to know about, to look at, because you.
But
go ahead, Ted, Vince, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just like what Trump is trying to. When you start militarizing against Black and brown people, and you bring the army into the scenario, well, you're literally just looking to execute everybody. And him trying to say he's going to invoke this act, which he can't do without all the states, as we all know. But even just the fact that he thinks he can do that, and we saw yesterday with this whole Bible church posing thing, exactly what this man is capable of.
Vanessa, Lizzie, what did you think of that moment, sort of what had happened? Because there are obviously conflicting events, but there were
at the church?
The protesters in front of the White House that were just
clearing them all out.
I'd have to look. I try my best to avoid watching a lot of news when this stuff is going on. I find it really hard to kind of wade through all the noise to figure out the actual truth.
Mhm.
But I mean, the whole church thing I think was a weird photo op thing. I'm not sure why he did that.
It felt like a photo op. It did.
It was, yeah, it was very strange. I mean, I'm far from a Trump hater, but I'm far from a Trumpanista.
Mhm.
And it was weird.
I mean, also the priest and the seminarian of the church
Yeah.
were shot with tear gas and rubber
Yeah.
bullets. Like,
And
what?
I was so happy with it. The bishop spoke
Yes.
out this
Yes.
morning,
too.
and I'm so happy to hear that. He is in this reality TV world that just drives me insane. It's like, what can I do today? Can I do more than one thing to shock the American public? And there's so many people that buy into that reality TV thing. And I just get so mad. But I was really, really upset to stand there and say how he's a friend of the protesters and the police are tear gassing people and shoving their way through, punching the Australian reporter. And I'm like, do you see what he just did? And I'm like, I don't understand this. And it's just sheer craziness.
When Lizzie and Vanessa, when you're seeing things unfold, to whatever extent you're watching them, Vanessa, how do you feel about what Black people are going through, or someone like that? Was the reason for connecting you to Vince. Is what do you think? What would you like to say? What would you like to offer? What is it, because you've not had a direct conduit before? What is it that you feel? What comes up for you as you watch the events unfold in the video of being killed? What is it that you would like to convey to someone who may not know that they have allies or supporters or people who are wishing them well, because you're in rural Maine and you're in rural Pennsylvania? What is it you would like to convey to Vince?
Well, we actually had some violence and destruction in Portland last night. It started very peaceful. The news was covering it live, and I saw some of it on Facebook. But they did end up causing some property damage. 23 people got arrested. My assumption is most of those people are white. It almost is like there's white people hijacking this moment to feel like they're doing something, but what they're really doing is detracting from the issue, which is that cop should have never been on that guy's neck for 10 minutes. I think everyone was united in that should have never happened. And even the most ardent law enforcement supporters are saying there was no reason for that. I've worked in law enforcement support before. I was a forensic scientist in Texas, and I worked very closely with every law enforcement agency in the state. And there's just no justification for what that officer did and the other officers that were around and didn't stop it. Like, there's no justification for any of it. And so the riots feel unnecessary because everyone was already in agreement that this officer and all the involved officers were wrong. And it does seem to me like there's some faction of people who I think are just trying to feel like they're helping that are doing the very opposite.
Vanessa, Vince, what do you think about that?
I agree 100%.
Right.
Lizzie,
Well, I think, what I'm seeing is very unorganized, and you do have a few people who are making it horrible for people who are doing protesting in the right way. And so if I go back to think about like my Gloria Steinem, watching the women's movement, it was more rallied. There were head speakers. There were people, rallying the charge. Who are those people who can rally the groups to make it effective? And when I say that, I'm sitting here thinking, I just watched this video,
Yes.
13, and we've buried them or we've chased our leaders out of the country.
Isn't that vital to know? So Vanessa, the thing in the 13, there's a section about how, I think Van Jones says it, saying we have no leaders because every time we had a leader, it would become public enemy number one or killed, or Martin Luther King. And I mean, there's so many of them that's one of the reasons for Black Lives Matters, is that there is no person at the head of it. You can't find them, because if you could find them, they would be killed. So it really is about, I hear what you're saying. And I guess Lizzie, if you want, Vince, can you comment a bit on that about how, because that's where it gets into the conversation about being systemic. It's not just police violence, it's that we're taking the leaders out from under you, we're taking repercussions of law against people committing violence off the table. People get scot-free. Like that's where we're talking about systemic, as opposed to just being Vince feels bad about being Black.
As well as incarcerate us so that we can't even make the next generation of Black young women and men. You know, we can't make babies if we're locked up in jail. And we don't, as Black people, have a leader anymore. We don't, you know, Jesse Jackson, we got Al Sharpton, but he's not really, you know, in my opinion, he's for us, but he's not the kind of leader that we need in these times right now. I'm more upset about a lot of my Black athletes and actors and actresses who I've not heard really speak out. There's been a few people, Jamie Foxx, and I guess Floyd Mayweather is paying for George Floyd's funeral, etc. But I feel like as Black people, especially especially the people with the platform, need to start speaking up a lot more now. And especially right now, like they should have been speaking up this entire week. I mean, we're doing a Zoom phone call. Everybody's doing Zoom and putting messages out on their Facebooks and on their Instagrams. Why aren't you guys speaking? Why aren't people really talking about this and helping to yell at the government and figure out how do we get this change happening? I mean, I'm really, really happy that Minnesota now just is going to be doing the civil rights investigation for the Minnesota police department. I mean, and they're going to dig 10 years deep. That's a small baby step in the right direction, you know? And I think with that move, especially, and somebody had told me that the only reason that that's happening is because this computer guy, a hacker guy, Anonymous or something, leaked out all this information about the police department and very, very pertinent information that they obviously didn't want people to know about. I'll see if I can find it for you, Riaz, when we get off, and I'll send it to you. But I think, you know, that's a great start. I mean, I think I had read, sorry for my phone, I had read that in Minnesota alone, 193 Black people in the last year or year and a half have been killed by police, on-duty police. Like, that's a staggering, insane number. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, I can't even fathom that many people being, like, can you imagine if there were 200 of those or 193 of those videos on TV right now? People would just think of it as TV.
I was watching LA 92, another documentary on Netflix about the Rodney King riots, and the NAACP, and this is again 92, you don't have cameras. You don't have camera phones. And the only reason why they had that video of Rodney King is that some guy happened to have, he was a TV shooter, happened to have a TV shooting camera to record it. So in 92, there was an average of 55 complaints against the LAPD a week. A week. You had no evidence to say they did this to me, but 55 beaten faces, killed, murdered, put in jail, 55 a week came into the NAACP in the 80s, 90s against the LAPD because there was no accountability. There were no videos, there was no proof. And then you had the video and proof of Rodney King and acquitted, completely acquitted, by moving the trial from downtown DC, downtown LA, where it would have had a fair jury, to Simi Valley, which is all but 3% white. And that's the kind of systemic thing that they're like, okay, Rodney King, like this video, was the first time that you're like, okay, it goes beyond a shadow of a doubt. You know, they're just beating him with batons, Rodney King, well beyond when he cannot get up, they're still beating him. And again, like this video, it made people it was cut and dry. This is obviously bad. And then you go through the whole trial process, they dig into the police department, all this stuff comes up on radio calls referring to Blacks as lizards and monkeys and this. All that came out and they were still acquitted. And so that's where you feel like, you know, and the video that was released, Aubrey, a few months ago, that happened months ago. And the only reason anyone's doing anything about it now is that it took time to build awareness. Otherwise, murdered, broad daylight, murdered, you know, and that's the kind of thing that they're saying, okay, before we didn't have videos. Now we have videos, we're showing you the irrefutable evidence of what's happening. And either people are saying, well, it's a few bad apples, or, well, the protesters' violence is really the problem. And
Or what did the black person do?
what did the
Or
black
that's
people do?
the black person. It's all the black person. They must have stole something, or they must have shot him, or had a knife. You know,
It's the assumed criminality.
there's no safe place for us. It doesn't matter if I'm walking to the store or if I'm jogging down the street. At any moment, I could die, and at the hands of a white man or somebody with a vendetta against black people. And that is absolutely the scariest thing I think I've ever had to really think about. And I've never really, I mean, I've thought about it my entire life, but I've never really thought about it as hard as I'm thinking about it now until all of this is blown up on TV. I am 100% deathly afraid. And I have an 18-year-old son. He just turned 18.
Thank you. I was just about to
two,
get there. I was just about
yeah,
to ask you.
2 weeks ago, and he is a basketball star. He goes to Santa Clarita Valley International High School, and he trains at Kobe Bryant's facility in Los Angeles. Um, he is a young, handsome, good-looking kid with the whole world ahead of him, and I'm afraid that I'm going to get a phone call that he's been killed or murdered or just put in handcuffs for no reason. And if it hasn't already happened, it probably will happen. And I'm more afraid of him being killed than I am about myself. I mean, I've been here 42 years. I'm still living a great life. I still plan on living a great life. But he's just starting out in this world and literally graduating high school right now as we speak this month. And this is what the beginning of his adulthood has to be like. And that, I feel like, is such a shame and such a just horrible. It's horrible for all of our children to see what's happening right now.
Lizzie, response?
We got this movement, and I'm so thrilled to see younger people out there. I belong to an ag organization that part of what we do is write resolutions and have a lobbyist and do lots of things. But when I look at that organization, I have to tell you, there's no diversity. I mean, it's very minuscule. And why can't we get some of these younger people who are on this movement to be in groups like ours where we can push policy forward? And so it has me just kind of questioning the whole world I'm existing in and what can I bring to a table to move it along. And so, I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to take me a while to figure that answer out, but it's just very disheartening. And I just was always believed, again, going back to Gloria, you know, you do the protest, you move, you get the votes, you get things to happen. But women haven't even been able to make it, you know, to where they need to be.
No.
So I think we have a very similar struggle in some things and other things not. And I have to admit, you know, I used to think until I started doing some of this research, my DNA, and the 13th hit so many things home. I mean, I came off of that with so many pages. But, you know, I used to think, is this just all stemming, all of this, from the Civil War? Because that's been how long ago? And, you know, but yet when I start going back and I find out things about my family tree, and I'm like, I get so emotional about something that I found in my family tree. And I'm thinking, how could you not feel the emotion from somebody being in slavery and knowing that they were paid $100 for them? That would wreak havoc on me.
Paid $100 then, but then could be shot now, and there's no repercussions. There's no punishment.
Yeah.
In terms of the worthlessness of the life, and I think I hear a lot of Black rhetoric about, we just want our lives to be as valued as yours. That if we heard in the street downtown for me, or down the street for me, that 2 people were gunned down and they were Black, that would have a very different news response and legal response than if 2 people were gunned down the street and they were white. The whole investigation would be different. All the money and resources would be different. That we implicitly devalue Black lives as, well, they're part of the violence, they're part of the drugs, you know, who knows what's going on over, like, we just in our minds allow there to be a double standard. And I think when you see the video of a man being murdered over minutes and minutes and minutes, it takes all the black and white, sorry, the wrong way to say it, all the shades of gray out of it. And then now you see that and it hits your eyes, and then you're like, how are they going to discount it now? Is it going to be the violence of the protesters? Is it going to be, we'll do this amendment, but they go down the Minnesota department and they find issues, but there's no repercussions? You know, what is it going to be that's going to, what are they going to do to divert from the real problem? Like the whole Colin Kaepernick take a knee, I'm like, none of this is the issue. None of this is the actual issue. This is someone's.
But also, how about when Colin Kaepernick got sponsored by Nike and a bunch of white people all decided to burn Nike shoes? What's the difference?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like you have to compare the two because they're exactly the same, but because it's black people doing it, we're 1,000 times worse. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I think what white America, my question for white America that hates black people is, what makes us not as good as you? That's the real question. Why are we a lower level of human being? We're all made up of the same exact cells, everything down to the bone. But I'm a lesser human being, even in 2020, than most white people. Put it like this. Let me put it in even more perspective. People cared more about Central Park Amy's dog than they did about the black man who had the cop called on him because he was just asking her to leash her dog. What does that tell you? People care more about dogs than they do human beings. That is in itself is one of the scariest, most mind-blowing things I've ever heard in my entire
Vanessa, what are you thinking now? You're nodding. What are you thinking? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I've actually seen very liberal, what I would call pro-choice people get deeply hurt, offended, and angry when a shelter talks about aborting a litter of puppies. And it's like, okay, well, why are you so upset about this litter of puppies that they now don't have to find homes for? But to do it to a human baby is okay. And it blows my mind, because you're right. People care more about animals than they do people. And I think that's across races, that's across different, income levels, that's everything. And it is frightening, because I did see the video with the woman in Central Park, and everyone's going on about the dog. I'm like, the dog was not the point. I mean, yeah, she's probably not treating the dog well, but like that wasn't the point.
But you see how it becomes the point.
Yes, and it did. It very quickly was all I heard about the video was the dog.
And now with the video that we have of this murder, it'll be about the violence of the protests. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second.
That's why we have to control the narrative.
Conversation for people to have. That's why that's their easy scapegoat. And I don't know how you change it. And how do you change? It's taken us generation after generation after generation. My generation realized how my dad would talk sometimes. I mean, he wasn't a mean person whatsoever, but he had negative connotations, whereas my brothers had the negative connotations and the meanness about it. And so there was a difference. But, from dad, I mean, in my age, I don't talk that way. I don't act that way. But my kids, they are now very sensitive. So how do we keep generating, and does it have to be generations? I mean, how do we break through to people that this was what they saw, this is what they repeat? Where do we break that chain?
Vince? It's a big question. It's a big question.
It is.
I wish I knew. I mean, and I feel like a lot of it, here's the thing, on an economic level, if there was more black money, I think we would have a little bit more control with policy, with legislation, with everything. We don't own anything, except, I mean, that's not true. Let me rephrase that. We do own things. And I feel like a lot of black people are looking to turn towards only buying black or only keeping the dollars within our community now at this point, which I'm not against, but I'm also not for. Because then we're just getting back into a whole nother segregation level of all of it. That's why I feel like in my role in all of this is to try to educate as many people, black, white, purple, green, whatever, and myself as much as possible. I can't sit idly by and just not be a part of this movement and let anybody get killed anymore. I refuse to do that. Um, but really about the money, like I really think that Black dollars need to increase on many levels, and that stems from education, jobs, and opportunities that we are given, which obviously we are never given those opportunities. But I think all of that might be on a roll to start changing.
Well,
I mean, I
let's talk
hope.
a bit about that, because if one of the ways out of this is economic prosperity, how would you say, Vince, based on your own experiences, in terms of a career, in terms of interviewing for jobs, in terms of moving up at various networks that you've worked, how has racism played in with you in terms of you trying to build a career and move up and create that affluence that would have more power? How, because again, systematic. How has racism shown itself over the course of your career? I've worked with you. I know how you work. So, but how has it manifested?
The one that I was actually just having this conversation with another friend of mine yesterday, that who also is Black and who I worked at MTV with for a very long time. Actually, when I first got there in about 98, 99. And here's the thing, like, I am at a very, I would say, decent level of the production world. I'm a production manager by trade. I'm an AD, most of the time assistant director on most of the shows that I do recently. I've been in the business now almost 22 years. Since I was 18 years old, right out of high school. I didn't go to college. I started right into the television business. And majority of the time since the beginning of me starting this career, I have been passed up by multiple white coworkers, and they've been given opportunities as producers, as executive producers, as owners of shows, you name it. And while I'm still struggling to go from production assistant to production coordinator to being a production manager, and still even sometimes knowing that I'm not getting the same rate that another production manager who's white is getting. I've definitely been through that and seen it and felt it. And even still to this day, I feel I'm passed up for certain opportunities because I'm Black. And also because, I mean, I'm also not a quiet person. I have no quietness in me for any reason. And if I have an opinion, most definitely you're going to hear it. But I will always try to be respectful as much as I possibly can. But I get it from my mom. I got a big mouth, and I love to use it. That's just who I am, being on the scene. Um, but yes, it has hurt me. I think I should be in a definitely bigger tax bracket at this point from the longevity of being in this business, but I'm not. But that doesn't mean I won't be. I
But in
still
terms of your
strive
own,
for that.
in terms of your own sort of suggestion that the affluence in Black dollars, and I'm like, okay, that all sounds good to me, but do you feel like even in that you're capped career-wise? There's a glass ceiling. Economically, there's a glass ceiling. Again, it's part of the systematic thing. Is I don't want people, I don't want I don't want white people who don't have a lot of experience with racism or Black cultures to think that when we say systematic, it's everything. But it really does affect a lot of ways of getting out and making change. That you're sort of like, I can't get a fair shake that way. I can't get a fair shake that way. I can't get a fair shake that way. And when you see, rioting turn to looting, in the instances where it happens, it comes after a lot of frustration. It comes after a lot of frustration that the system, the social contract, the way that the rules operate are never going to be in their favor. So why don't they just upend it? And it gets news, it gets attention, more so than a peaceful demonstration would. If it was a peaceful demonstration at Bryant Park, we'd all see it on the news for a segment and then we'd move on. And now it's sort of like, no, it's going to be in front of your eyes and in front of your news. And so it is the frustration for someone like Vince, and what I've seen Vince post in the past few days is so bottomless, because it just keeps going on into another field, into another realm. And I always think in terms of voting and things, I've traveled a lot around the country over the past few years, and I'll sit with someone rural in Alaska, a white person in Alaska, and I'll ask them, what is it, generally conservative, generally rural, what is it that they fear most? And they will tell me it's the overstep of the government. And then I'll go to inner city DC and I'll ask the same thing to a woman living in the projects. And she'll say, it's the overstep of law enforcement and the government. And I'm like, why do you two not see that you have the same thing? You could be allies. I always say this. Conservative rural Americans have a lot in common with inner city Blacks, a lot. They both fear more than anything the overstep of the government as enforced through law enforcement. Both groups, absolutely something they could connect on, but they never have these conversations. Go, please.
So Riaz, why do you think it is that those two demographics vote to the complete opposite of each other?
Because they never are allowed to see their common interests, and their common interests are always told that they're opposite each other. Always.
And nobody ever takes the step to actually start the conversation on both sides. You know what I mean? Like whether it's Black or white, like let's have like what we're doing right now. This is where it begins. This is the movement and what we're trying to change right now. And I feel grateful to be part of this opportunity and to be able to speak with all of them.
There's so much more commonality. The bigger problem I have and why I do this and why Epic was developed in 4 chairs, which is what we're doing, is because people are led through their phones, through their screens, which are highly curated, to believe they have nothing in common. Because your phone and the algorithm works to get more likes, and then those likes turn into purchases. That's the whole system. It's no big sophisticated thing. I want more likes from you, and then I want you to buy more stuff. That's how it works. They're never going to give you an opinion that debunks what you're thinking. So unless we arbitrarily say, I'm going to reach to you in Maine, and I'm going to drag you and Vince together, there is no connecting anymore. And and I'll sit there and, in Texas, in a conservative Christian community, and they'll say, the modern world is all about sex and violence, and we want family values, and we want to go back to a simpler time. And then I'm in a Muslim community in Baltimore, and they'll say, everything's about sex, and we want things to be simpler. And I'm like, you guys are saying the exact same thing. You just don't hear each other. The amount of times I hear the most antithetical people verbally say the exact same thing, but they believe because this makes you think you have nothing in common. Vince and you, Vanessa, have nothing in common. Your interests, Vanessa, are exactly opposite his. And if you vote for your interests, you're voting against his. And Vince, if you want to protect yourself, Vanessa's your enemy. Go after Vanessa. She's the bad one. She's the problem.
That's a damn shame. It's really sad. It's really sad that it's like
sad, but it's unnecessary.
Right.
Because in an hour and 15 minutes, I'll ask each of you, do you feel that there's too much separating you three that you cannot come up with work together and come up with ideas and collaborate? Is there too much different between you three that you can't figure this out?
Not one thing.
Not one thing.
I think I've related on something you both have said, or all three of you have said at one point in this whole conversation. Nothing that I've disagreed with, that's for sure.
It's not rocket science.
No.
I think the biggest problem we have now is Black people want some level of protection from law enforcement. We're not reinventing the wheel. Politicians will say that if he wants that, then he also wants socialist America, and then that way they're going to get you not to support him. That when people take the civil rights and mix it with the economy, people are going to be like, I feel bad for Vince, but I'm not interested in the socialist America. I'm not voting for him. And then Vince's rights get thrown out. They're mixing things that should not be mixed.
Yeah, but isn't it funny, we've come into this pandemic and everybody was so against Bernie, but yet answers to some of the issues were Bernie thoughts and processes, and the guy, I'm trying to think, I wanted to meet him so bad, that ran on giving everybody $1,200 or $1,500.
Andrew Yang.
We do. And and people needed it, and it was an answer to get some funding. It didn't come fast enough, through many wrong hiccups even in our own state, but that was the answer. So they say they don't want social, but those they realize it but don't admit it. Makes me mad.
Anything, Vanessa, were you going to say something?
It's funny. I think politically I'm probably very different from everyone on here. But yeah, I have a very libertarian streak in that I don't really care what people do in their lives. Riaz, I don't care that you're married to a guy. I don't care that I do not care. I just don't want to pay for it. And I think if we can just kind of agree on maybe that, do whatever you want, but handle it yourself.
Here's the only thing, I'll have this conversation many times. I appreciate a libertarian philosophy because I think there's a lot to be said for it. Live and let live. The problem is not only does the rural white American and the inner city Black both want the arm of the law to step back, the problem is Blacks also need some protections.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, because of an average white person like you two, and you're women, so you face your own struggles. I hear that. But in terms of your race, the two of you, what they call privilege, which I think is a provocative term. I don't know how helpful it is, but you two will not have the same disadvantage that Vince will have when you show up to a job and all. So libertarianism works in theory, but the problem is that Blacks also, because of our history, need protections, need police officers not to crush their necks. And that's something that libertarianism will say, okay, hands off, but there is a problem. So I always want libertarians to engage more with the other side, because it's not just hands off, there has to be some hands for protection. And that, and it's not selling the economy away, because I hear you, economic interests are what they are. But there are some big issues that we need some protections in place for. But I really do think that the rural white community, especially if you talk about the poor rural white community, known as white trash, and then you look at the inner city Black community, both looked at very similarly, both not heard, both given promises by politicians for decades that no one ever makes good on. They have a lot to learn. The problem is that the media and politicians keep them angry. You get more money donations, you get higher ratings if you're angry. And so we don't see the potentials for collaboration because we're always angry. We're always made to be angry. Well, we have a few minutes left. Before we leave, I just wanted to have a moment where, if you don't mind, Vanessa and Lizzie, if you could give Vince some words of either encouragement or something about how you feel, what you want him to feel about you, what you're doing, what you're thinking about, and then Vince the same thing, because what we're doing is bridging. It wasn't that hard a bridge to do, but what is it you'd like? Because I do, having seen Vince's Facebook and knowing him, it's been a very emotional few days for Vince, and I so appreciate you doing this. But it's been intense for you. It's been really intense, emotional, tears, anger, rage, all of it. So if you two, as two newer friends, what would you like to say to Vince as he faces the next few days?
Now, I just want to say that I'm like here for you. I don't know how I fit into this equation, so I think I'm going through maybe a metamorphosis stage, really, to see what I can bring to the table to even help. When I do feel helpless because I'm not quite sure which way to turn to be of great assistance. I do youth programming in the summer. Maybe I should be focusing on working with inner city kids in Harrisburg. Maybe I need to be a catalyst to teach them how to be advocates and go down this political road. That might be something I could handle. So
I like that idea.
But I think that there's someone, but I also feel, how much are they going to listen to a white woman? And, I don't know. Is there a difference? Is there not a difference? And so I'm definitely going to be watching more, reading more, observing more. And you can find me on Facebook, Lizzie Bailey, and we all can continue conversations and maybe hash out, how can I spend my summer with the youth and make this better? I always look at poverty. How do we address poverty? Because I think we like keeping people impoverished to keep that control. And, how do we solve that? I think poverty can be solved, but they have to want to solve it. We've said that for years. So.
Absolutely. Vanessa, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, kind of in the same vein. It's hard to know when we're supposed to shut up and listen and when we're supposed to stand by you and speak up. And it's, I saw something the other day of like white savior syndrome, and like, so when are we crossing the line from being supportive to, oh, it's okay, go sit over there, we'll handle it for you, because you can't. And like, it seems like such a tightrope to walk, to be an ally but not be offensive even unintentionally. I don't know, a lot of us just don't even know what to do or what to say that won't be accidentally hurtful.
Vince?
And I completely understand where you're coming from. I had a conversation with a gentleman earlier on my Instagram who made a comment about the whole blackout that's going on. Is for the music industry. They're not doing any music, so everybody's trying to black out Instagram. But in doing so, they're hashtagging it with Black Lives Matters, which is blacking out all the messages for what's happening in the Black Lives Matters movement. So it's really not helping the cause. But so I explained this to the gentleman and told him that there was two different things that were happening. And he private messaged me and said, hey, look, I'm a complete white dude from, blah, 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 wherever. I am trying my best to figure out my voice on how I can help you or help all of us in any kind of way. And every time I say something or I post something, I get ridiculed and people hate on me and send me all these kind of crazy messages. And I just don't know what to do, but I'm really, really wanting to help. And instantly I was like, look, bro, I sent him a grassroots law.org, which is a whole program getting back to grassroots and looking for funding on how to change policy and legislation, which I just discovered today. I sent him that information, and I said to him, I said, look, I understand, and I apologize to him. I'm sorry that you're getting reverse racism put on you because you're trying to help. And I could hear that he was actually genuinely trying to figure out what his best voice in this whole movement is going to be, which I'm sure you guys are as well. I think you both already have a great head start because you see that there is a problem. And just even dealing with the inner city youth that you might work with, Lizzie, we just want to be heard. So if there's somebody that actually cares, black, white, purple, green, and really puts forth an effort and shows, actions speak louder than words. We can speak all day long and say these things over a Zoom phone call. But what comes into action is when we actually take those and make them real actions and make them reality. And I think that's really what everybody as a white person, as a person needs to understand and realize at this time right now. The being sorry, we're past everybody being sorry. And that's for everybody. Nobody needs to apologize for what's happening now at this point. Apologies are not going to fix the situation. Fix the situation. But what is doing what we're doing, talking, calling our Congress people, screaming out to the White House as best we can in the proper way that we can, and really coming up with a plan together so that everybody can have an equal opportunity on this planet and in this country. Yeah. That's what I believe.
Vince, how did this conversation feel? Because I know my thing with you was I was like, I want to set you up to the most productive conversation you can have. How did this feel for you?
I feel like this was a great moment for me. This is probably one of the first times that I've actually really spoken out loud about all of this that's going on. I mean, I have some friends who are staying with me currently right now who get it, but also don't get it and really just want to be sorry, like I'm so sorry, and they see me crying and see me having to break away from them and go take a walk around the block because I'm in tears. And they also want to help the best way they can, but they also, if you will, their white privilege has not allowed them to understand really what I'm going through, but I'm trying to teach them. I've had moments of snapping off on people and expecting them to know what's going on. In particular, one of my friends who came over here and saw me upset and was like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "What do you mean, what's wrong with me? Do you not look at the news? Yeah. Do you not know what's going on in the world right now? Like everything, no, I'm not okay. And you shouldn't be either. But that's not my place to tell anybody that they shouldn't be okay about anything. That's not my right. My right is to deal with my feelings as best as I possibly can without letting them turn into something negative to where I can't function. Because Sunday I didn't get out of bed all day long. I couldn't. I got out of bed for 5 minutes, walked around the house, and then I was in and I slept all day long. Like I just couldn't face the world. But I think for me personally, I appreciate all of your time. I appreciate us talking about this and being open and honest and telling the things that, are scary to tell to strangers as well as on the level of what we're speaking about. And I think with people like us in this group speaking right now, I think we have a good foothold on starting to really make change happen and doing it together and making each other understand where we're all coming from.
Great. Well, thank you, all three of you. I so appreciate your time and your willingness to try this. I think it went well. I think you see each other as people that in the real world you didn't cross each other's paths, but if you did, you're there to offer help and support for each other, and I think that's lovely. I'll connect you all into an instant message group, a direct message, just as things come up. What do you think about this? Read this. I just saw this documentary. I'd like you all to be able to connect it to each other. And I thank you all for your time. Thank you so much.
And just so you guys know, I also started a Facebook page yesterday called What is the Plan? And it is not about, it's only about solutions, ideas, resolutions, and facts on how we're going to change this policy and legislation together. I'm moderating it and keeping it because, you know, people want to spew out their own personal agendas about Trump and about this and about that and throwing up news articles. It's not about news articles. It's about showing me who can we donate to, who can we call, putting up phone numbers, the grassroots law organization, all of these things. I'm just trying to keep it at a minimum of personal agendas and egos, and really just keeping it about the facts. And it's a melting pot, so far as a melting pot of all colors of people. And really, I would love for you guys to join, and feel free to put in any information and help educate or ask questions of anybody.
Great. I'll make sure I connect you guys so you can continue this.
Okay,
All right,
great.
cool. Nice meeting you guys. Have a good night.
Yes, you too.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank
Bye,
you so
guys.
much. Bye.